Let's roll. Okay, folks, it's 1740, time to begin. Welcome to the first and hopefully only Lager Working Group meeting. My name is Scott Hollenbeck. I'm privileged to co-chair this meeting with Mark Blanchet. We've only got an hour. We've got a full schedule. The agenda is here. Okay, so we're going to spend about 40 minutes looking at remaining issues with our one and right now only milestone document. Audric is going to lead us through a discussion of an implementation report, and Yonea-san will talk to us about some Lager use cases. Got to go to the next document here. All right, I lost my note well. Here we go. Okay, just as a reminder, this working group is being conducted under the terms of the IETF's Note Well policy. Here's the text as you can find it on the IETF website. Yes, before we get any further, we need a minute taker, note taker person. Do we have a volunteer? And a jabber scribe? We can't proceed without both. Paul?
I can do minutes.
Thank you, Paul. So we have a minute taker. Do we have a jabber scribe? Stefan, thank you. All right, I'm going to pass around the blue sheets. All right, thank you, Mark. Okay, now we do have one challenge in that the presenter for our Lager specification discussion, Kim Davies, is remote. Kim, are you online and available? Okay, we have him in Jabber. Okay, Meet Echo, I think we have a ping to you via Jabber about unmuting our remote participants. So here's a ping via microphone.
I'm sorry for the delay. We're kind of waiting for me to come to appear. Just about it.
Yeah, technology is great when it works. I'll tell you what, let's skip Kim then. You want to go to Audric, since he is here? Oh, Kim is a he, by the way.
Hello, can you hear me?
Just fine.
Thank you. Sorry, the technology dropped out just as I was about to start talking.
We can see you too.
Perfect.
So just say next slide, Kim, and you want me to step through.
Okay, great. Firstly, my apologies, I can't be there in person, but thank you for letting me present remotely. Hopefully there'll be no more hiccups as I go through. essentially what I'm going to do is try and give a status update on all the outstanding issues relating to the LGR specification. And maybe, just maybe, we can come to resolution on all of them during today's meeting. Next slide. As most of you are probably aware, we had an interim meeting virtually of this working group on August 24th. During that meeting, we had a version 0.0 of the draft. This was originally an independent draft that was adopted by the working group. During that meeting, we went through many of the outstanding issues that we knew about the draft at the time and produced a set of action items as a result of the discussion during that meeting. A version 0.1 and a version 0.2 were published to take in that feedback from that meeting. Since then, there's also been 2 additional versions that have been published, a version 0.3 and most recently a version 0.4 of the draft. I think most of the edits that we've seen are relatively minor, clarifying language, making the document a little clearer, inserting text where there were some placeholders in the past, addressing some minor issues, but certainly nothing that I consider to be substantially changing the logic or the approach of the overall standard. Next, I should also add that I've been away for most of the time between the last meeting and this meeting, so I'd really like to thank Asmus, my co-author, for picking up the pen during that period. Next slide. So there's 5 key areas of remaining issues, at least that I'm aware of, that have been discussed on the list, and I'll go through each one in more detail. In short, defining origin URLs in the document, adding a disposition registry to the document, registration for the media type for LGRs, how to handle metadata for reference LGRs, and then lastly, reviewing the Relax MG schema. So next slide. So the first open issue, this origin URL issue, very early in producing the document, there was a suggestion from the community that there be a provision that in the metadata, in the header of of a document, you could specify a URL, which would be sort of like the origin URL, where a client, if they wish to do so, could ping that URL to see if there's a more recent version of the LGR and then do something intelligent like download it and implement it automatically. This was discussed during our virtual meeting. Some people thought it wasn't necessary. Some people thought it might be a good idea. I don't think that there was a strong consensus in that call about what to do with it. There are obviously other ways to update LGRs. This doesn't need to be baked into the specification itself. My sense is that there's been no strong voices that have called for this, that it's an essential element to add to the specification. So my suggestion is, unless someone is willing to provide text on how this might work, that we abandon the suggestion as a potentially good idea but not essential, and just move on. So that's the status of that issue as of right now. Next slide. The next issue is creating a disposition registry. In the document, there are 4 suggested dispositions. These are actions that are taken as a result of a calculation against an LGR, such as to allocate a domain, to block a domain, and so on. In our last meeting, we discussed whether that should be an IANA registry. This would allow for some extensibility, such that if someone wanted to define a new disposition, it could be added with a subsequent specification, and an IANA registry would facilitate that, make that more straightforward. So the feedback was that this seemed to be something we wanted to do. I've produced some draft text that I'll show you on the next slide, but in essence, the approach is essentially that we create an IANA registry that's divided into two sections. One is a set of standard dispositions, and that would initially be populated with the 4 dispositions from this document. And then any additional dispositions could be added to the standard registry through a subsequent standards track RFC. And then secondly, there'd be a private use disposition registry. And this would be essentially where parties that create their own LGRs that have their own private dispositions could declare them in the registry on a first come, first served basis, essentially to ensure against conflicts. There'd be no qualification criteria, simply that you would state that you're using that, and this is fairly common in IANA registries. Next slide. So this is draft text for the 05 draft that is not yet published. But this is the entire text for the disposition registry as it stands right now. Because it was relatively short, I just thought I'd put it quickly on a slide, and I've underlined, I think, the key points, and I think I've already spoken to most of them. The mechanism I wanted to highlight, though, by showing you the text, is how to distinguish between a standard and a private disposition. Just as kind of a straw man, I've proposed that dispositions that are private take the form of having a prefix based on the entity that is registered at a colon and then sort of the disposition verb. So, you know, in the example on the screen, a company called Acme could reserve Acme colon reserved, where reserved is the disposition, and this would be registered in the registry. So the presence of a colon would be the signifier that this is a private extension as opposed to a standard disposition. Not fixed to this, it's just a starting point, just a suggestion on how we might want to distinguish between the two concepts. And you know, very happy to receive feedback on this suggestion. Next slide.
Can we have?
Sorry, I have a. My name is Martin Durst, speaking for myself. I have an observation, which is that in a lot of cases in the application.
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
In the application.
I can't hear who's speaking.
In the application area, we have made the observation that limiting the registration too much kind of lets everybody just go to the private disposition, and the standard thing is not used at all. So is it necessary that we say?
And eat the mic. You can't hear it.
Yeah, it's definitely sounds quite different. Okay, my name is Martin Durst, and I would just like to make the observation that in many past cases for registries in the application area, we have made them experience that we were too strict at the start, and then later came to the conclusion that it would have be much better to have something like, instead of standards track, which requires an RFC, something like expert review or something a little bit later. So I just wanted to check whether you thought about that.
Okay, while Mark is typing in Jabber, trying to get some feedback from Kim, if the Meet Echo folks can help us figure out why Kim is not hearing us, that would be helpful.
Kim, can you speak?
I suspect Kim can't hear anything. He's probably waiting for you
Lorenzo says he's working on that, and Kim says he can wait meet echo and rejoin again, if that helps.
Or we can just wait for comments at the end.
Okay, maybe that's it.
Oh, turn it off, wait 5 seconds, turn it on again. Oh,
We're having problems with it.
Yeah, it just disconnected, but it was having no audio.
Yeah, we could hear him, he couldn't hear us.
Okay, yeah.
It just reconnected.
Hello again.
Okay, can you hear us, Kim?
I can, yes. Sorry about that. So I understand the comment was standards track is too high a bar for registering a standard disposition. I don't feel strongly about that, so I'm happy to take an alternative.
You want to give us a suggestion of other places?
What do you think the right choice? There's a
Okay, I was asked by Barry to say what I think about the choices. I'm not sure if I even remember them correctly. I just made the observation that in general, we have had lots of experience where we were too strict and later we made it more open. So, and here we are starting again with a very strict, with the strictest one I think that we have, and maybe that's really necessary, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, this is Barry. So the choices, and I agree absolutely with what Martin just said. We often paint ourselves into a corner with too strict policies. The choices are standards action, which requires standards track documents, IETF review, which looks for an IETF stream RFC, but it can be informational or experimental as well. RFC required, which also allows independent stream RFCs, or then you can go for the expert review or specification required that doesn't require any RFC but has a designated expert reviewing the requests. And those are basically the choices you have. And first come, first serve, which is probably not appropriate for that particular one.
And we do have a question from Asmus, I think, in the Meet Echo queue. Asmus, could you start?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we are.
Good. Not a question, but a comment. We already have another area in the specification where there is the tension between predefined and application-defined values, and that is in the scope element. And there's a different solution chosen there that currently reads types of scope other than domain are application defined. Such application defined type values must be in a namespace app type previously defined in the document. An explanation of the application defined type in the description element is recommended. That's yet another approach. And we may want to maybe make sure we don't have too many different ones in the document. So whatever we decide for the disposition registry may feed back on the use of the scope element.
Andrew?
This is Andrew Sullivan, since I've been reminded about this only moments ago in an email, I want to make it perfectly clear that I'm speaking only for myself. I'm a little nervous about the private disposition approach here because it's a little weird to set up a registry that has stuff that isn't intended to be interoperable. So it seems to me that I understand the point of it, and it makes sense in its own context, but it seems to me that the gap between a first come first serve thing that just isn't supposed to be interoperable and a standards track thing which is really hard to do is a big one. It might be actually that what you really need here is the third category, right? So you've got the ones that are really super high bar because those are the initial ones, And then you got these private dispositions, which are just like, you know, okay, I'm registering this because it's my domain and these are the things that I want to publish. But then presumably there's some middle level where people want to try stuff out and they want to make things work reasonably well amongst each other and so on. And I'm not sure that private disposition is good enough for that. And it's not obvious that they're likely to, the last bit here, interoperability, are going to require standard disposition, because I'm not sure actually that the IETF wants to do all that. So maybe you want an intermediate one, which is some sort of expert.
Something, for example, like we may see a second level, you know, special dispositions that may be used by multiple registries, but not everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, that makes sense to have a bit more formal than private, but less than standard.
Yeah, it seems to me that you might get a little bit more review that way. If you had a category that was expert review, right? Somebody looked at it. Oh yes, I see how this all fits together. We've got a well-defined specification. It might be even specification required might be good enough.
Yeah, we could have only expert review actually.
Yeah, you could do only expert review. I still think actually there's some value in the first come first serve piece of the registry, because I do think, right, there's going to be lots and lots of people who want to publish this so that they can express, here's what I'm doing. This is part of the goal, actually, of generalizing this work back when we talked about it in the first place. And so I would like to encourage people to be able to register these things so that if they've got wild and wonderful stuff they're doing in their private namespaces, we don't have to guess. It still seems to me it would be that there are going to be cases where we want something stronger. I would not object to moving the standard disposition to expert review and just calling it even that way. That'd be okay with me.
Before Kim gets back in, Paul Hoffman, Barry, you had made a slight mistake when you gave the list earlier. You said RFC required. In fact, it's just document required, even internet draft, I believe.
RFC
I'm sorry, publication required is the term, I believe.
RFC 50. Are you looking at 5226 now?
No, I'm not.
No, it's I'm quite familiar because I'm working on a BIS for it, so I'm quite
Okay.
familiar with it. RFC required is the
So we
policy.
have no publication
Specification required is the one in between. The specification required is any publicly accessible stable specification.
Okay. You didn't give that in the list. Maybe that's what I'm.
Yeah, I did, but I zipped through them. So
My take is we should not spend too much time on this. So I suggest we move forward. We have good comment to the authors and hopefully can come back. Kim?
I'm here again. Yes, that was very useful, and my opinion is I'm happy to lower the bar on sort of the standard disposition and consider the comments on merging them or treating them a little differently. Media type registration. I think this is a relative formality. The document specifies application /LGR plus XML as a media type for the document. Simply, it needed a media type registration form to be added in the INA considerations. Some draft text has been developed for that. Next slide. A new issue that was raised on the mailing list just a few days ago is providing some mechanism in the metadata to identify that it is a sort of a reference LGR, not intended to represent a specific domain, but nonetheless designed to target domains in general. Some of the approaches that were discussed as perhaps using example domains as the scope, or alternatively having an empty scope but with a type attribute set to domain. Personally, I don't think the exact approach is as critical as simply acknowledging in some text about how authors are expected to denote that it's a reference LGR. So happy to take suggestions or alternate text or alternate approaches on how to do that. I think it's a relatively minor issue. Next slide. I think this is just more of a housekeeping issue. As the document has progressed, there's been minor tweaks to the text throughout the document, and the schema may not have kept in lockstep with those updates. So the document would benefit from someone just doing a careful review of the schema in the appendix of the document to make sure it absolutely aligns with the rest of the specification text. I'm certainly happy to volunteer to do it again with fresh eyes, having not looked at it for several months, but I would appreciate others who might volunteer to do the same as well. Next slide. So real quick before I drop out again, next steps, the INA considerations text covering both the media type and the disposition registry have been drafted. Obviously, we have some feedback just now on the disposition registry to take into consideration. But the goal was, based on the feedback that we get during this meeting, to develop an 05 draft. I guess the questions I had top of mind writing these slides was whether the namespacing mechanism was okay, how do we want to approach metadata for reference tables, and anyone who wanted to volunteer to review the schema. Assuming no new issues are identified and everyone is relatively comfortable with the next draft, it might be ready for last call. That's the last slide I had. I'm happy to take any further comments.
Any question to Kim? Would people who read the document please raise your hand? Okay, thank you. For those people, do you think the document is, given the various minor stuff we discussed, ready for working group last call? I mean, ready to go to publication or not ready? Any comment or? One thumbs up, others are silent. Okay, well.
Again, it's Andrew, and again, just for me. This is a very specialized sort of document. I think that a good, careful last call with some solid review would be a good thing. But I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better without that, right? It's a small number of people who are all interested in this, so we might as well do it.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment. We know already that there's like 4 or 5 different implementation of it. So, okay, thank you, Kim. There should be a pink box somewhere. None.
It's working. So, hi everybody, I'm Odrik Schulknecht, and I will be introducing the challenges one might face when implementing an LGR processor. Next slide, please. Is better? Yeah, okay. So, a bit of context about the implementation. Basically, what we are doing with the LGR toolset is a web-based editor to offer non-XML savvy people the ability to edit their own LGR files. That means that they can manage all the variants, they can validate that the LGR they produce is correct, they can check for label validities and things like that without having to put their hands in the XML code. Next slide, please. So the first issue one has to overcome is the Unicode dependency. Indeed, LGR files can implement the code points with whatever Unicode version they want. However, there are very few if any, language or third-party libraries which aren't linked to a specific version of Unicode. So this is the first big question. And all the code point stuff and all the WLE engine is almost entirely based on regular expression. So the first question is, do I have to implement my own engine, or can I use one which already exists? Next slide. There are pros and cons for both of the solution. If you use one based on existing stuff, you will need to do whatever your language offers to you so you can abstract yourself from the Unicode version linked with the library or with the language. You are also dependent on the release cycle of the library, which means that whenever a new Unicode version comes out, you will maybe have to wait a few days to a few months before the library is updated, and you can integrate that into your own application. However, you can gain from all the existing community and tests that the library or language already has. It's not something bad. And the last point was that there is a list of recommended properties to be, Unicode properties to be supported by when processing an LGR file, and all libraries do not implement this, all these recommended properties. When writing your own engine, you go to a much more complex implementation. However, you can do whatever you want. It's really tailored to your needs, and you can stick to your own release cycle. Yes.
So, Yoshiro Yonea. So my question is, please back to one page. Previous page, Unicode dependency. So even though there is no Unicode dependency on this tool, but I think there is a dependency on the IDNA version. Like
yes,
IDNA 2008. So the IDNA 2008 still stick on Unicode 6.3.
Yeah.
So so I just want to know the dependency of the IDNA.
That's a good question. Actually, I didn't mention IDNA because it's very, very less complicated than Unicode. Basically, you can just parse the tables from INA website and make your own IDNA tester or something like that. Whereas for Unicode, you have to integrate all the properties, the regular expression capabilities, and things like that. Next slide. Okay, regarding label eligibility, so this has been clarified in the -03 version, but before it was after the first reading of the draft, I had a hard time understanding that when you test for a label against the LGR, you have actually to do two phases. The first one is testing each of the code points of the label and checking that they are indeed in the LGR files, and then applying the optional context rules, if any. And after that, you have to generate all the reflexive mappings of that label, apply the WLE rules on them, and check if there isn't any with invalid disposition, in which case the label is invalid. So in -03, some clarification about that was added, so now it's less an issue, but that was something to keep in mind before. Next slide, please. Now the big topic, of course, is variant generation. Depending on the LGR, the variant space is from a few variants to thousands of them. And this can be very difficult to handle. In both resources, you will use lots of memory or CPU to generate them. And also, as I was presenting before, the tool we are implementing is actually an interface, a user interface. So there are lots of questions to ask yourself about how you will present the user with thousands of variants and things like that. We have discovered that in some cases with poorly defined LGR files, we can generate duplicate variants. That means that we have the same labels, but with different dispositions. And this must be tracked down and an error must be raised. But that implies that you have to keep the list of all variants, so more memory consumption. And finally, one of the potential solutions to mitigate this kind of resource exhaustion is to limit the label length. If you authorize the default maximum length, which is 63, if I remember correctly, it's almost sure that you will go to a dose very quickly. So you can try to do some heuristics computation on your LGR and try to come with some length which is adapted to the LGR file you are processing. Next slide. So the next two slides are kind of examples of what I'm talking about. So for the duplicate variants thing, for example, it's taken from the drafts. So you can see that we have two code points, A and B, with A having a reflexive mapping, and then we have the sequence composed of A and B. So if you input the label AB, you get back two variants which are A, B composed with the reflexive mapping of A, and then the sequence AB. And both of them have different disposition, and so this is an error. Next slide. So some statistics about variant space. I generate them using the latest Arabic LGR. Using a set of 160 labels, I've computed the average numbers of variants. So actually, they're not so high, but you can see, for example, with a label of length 8, we can have more than 12,000 variants. So once again, you have to think about how you will keep them in memory and how you will offer and display them to the user.
This is just for your information. In last APNIC meeting, folks from Saudi NIC said that Arabic label occasionally generates millions of variants.
It's possible. The set I used was it's very small. It's I think there are the TLD from Arabic. It doesn't matter. So it's really just for the example. Yeah.
Martin Durst, Aoyama University. Yoshiro, could you get back to these people and get the example here somehow? Get the actual example that produces these many
variants. It
would be very helpful maybe for implementers.
Okay.
So I will send, Yoshiro again, I will send the URL of Saudi NIC's presentation on APNIC side. So that will be, I will send the URL of Saudi NIC's presentation at APNIC. That will provide an example.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Next slide, please. So as a conclusion, in the last month, we have seen some good discussion, I think, on the mailing list about the issue and about some clarification to bring to the text, which I think should help new implementers now to have a better understanding of what is to be done in such cases. I think that maybe one of the additions would be, I didn't say anything before, but because I'm not sure of what would be the good way to do that, but to implement some guidelines for LGR writers, like, for example, rules, the WLD rules are ordered. So maybe if you can put the first one is the rules which matches more labels than the others, that would be helpful for resource computation. And finally, as I said, we have the need to implement some measures to limit label length in order to prevent exhaustion of resources. Thank you.
Adric, do you, the last few slides, do you intend to provide text for the LGR spec, such as, information for implementers that would be useful, or?
I can do the technical side, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it will reflect in the actual way of doing LGR from a language point of view.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I can provide with some of the points that I've said.
Yeah, I think it would be a good contribution for.
Okay, so you think this could go to the current draft in the next section or something like that?
Or I would suggest you open tickets in the working group, tracker,
Okay,
and then provide text, and then we'll assign it to the Asmus and Kim to
decide.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have Asmus. Asmus, could you?
Yes. I had independently thought about the question of whether we should not add a simple line item to the metadata in this specification to be able to allow setting a minimum and maximum label lengths. There are, minimum and maximum label lengths in the IDNA protocol. The spec is supposed to be usable not just for that, and as Adric has reminded us, there may be some specific LGRs where the full IDNA legal label lengths is not really practical. So having a way to specify minimum and maximum label lengths in the metadata would be a very useful way. The alternative would be to kind of hack this up through a WLE rule. It's possible to do that, but it is really crude, and the intent is not as clear. So I would think it's not a major issue for implementers, but it would be nice, I think, to have that available in the metadata section. What do people think?
This is Paul Hoffman. I don't understand why there would be, for something like this, a maximum label rule for a particular language. If there's a word that's long, there's a word that's long. And I certainly don't understand minimum.
Edmund here. So Asmus, you mentioned about WLE, which is my first reaction to solving the issue as well. Why do you think that's not an appropriate solution to express those, even if you want to express minimum or maximum in WLEs?
Asmus, please go ahead.
Yeah, to me the issue is that yes, you can certainly do it in the WLE, but doing so hides the issue. The processor, of course, would interpret the WLE and then kick out labels that are too short or too long. But somebody looking at the XML would have a hard time figuring out that such a restriction existed. So it'd be, I think, advantageous possibly to be able to declare that intent. The other issue is that we have one domain, we have one scope type of type domain, but we have purposefully left open the scope to deal with other types of identifier systems, in which case there may not be a ready protocol handy that gives you the minimum and maximum label lengths like IDNA does. So I can see that you know, such a metadata approach would be useful and not very costly. So I would be somewhat in favor of it.
Okay, I think we have two action items here that could be implemented as two tickets just for tracking purposes. One is, you know, generic text about implementation, be careful about this and that. And then there's the specific, you know, minimum or maximum length thing that could be in different ways, WLE or, you know, metadata or forget about it. And I'm not sure we have a conclusion yet, so I guess that's going to be on the mailing list for that specific topic. Andrew?
This is Andrew Sullivan. On this topic, I want to redraw attention to what Asma said, right? That since this is supposed to be used with IDNA labels, then you've got an actual protocol thing that you're aiming at, and it's got limitations. It seems to me that if you create a mechanism by which you limit label length at either end, then you're going to need also exception handling for what to do when your zone policy allows a label that you can't do with this. And now that seems like a whole mechanism that is totally unnecessary here. Just make a policy in your zone that the thing can't be that long and you don't have the problem.
Speaking as an individual, I agree, but it's... I think, Asmus, you want to speak again? Okay. Thanks, Audric. He's back.
Okay, and that takes us to the last item on our agenda, logger use cases. Yoshiro Yonea.
Yes, this is Yoshiro Yonea. So I'm sorry, I don't have slides, but my talk is very short. So the target of logger is now we recognize two. One is a TLD. TLD means a root zone, and the other is a second level or third level for each TLDs, such as CCTLD or GTLDs. So, for example, if we use logger in second level or TLDs, existing TLDs, the logger is intended to replace the existing IDN tables. So, if we need IANA repository for the logger for each TLD, then is that work item for this working group or not is my question to the working group. And the other is from my experience on the developing LGR for root zone in CJK code between the CJK, that is Chinese and Chinese-Japanese coordination. We share the same script, Han, but we use differently in each languages. So we need some integration method for languages used in one registry. So I want to ask you if we should have some integration mechanism. So I'd like to know if there are other use cases for logger or LGR, and if these two things, that is repository, logger LGR repository for IANA and integration mechanism is the working item or something we should consider in this working group. Thank you.
Okay, do folks have any opinions or answers to Yonea-san's questions?
Edmund Chung here. I don't really have an answer, but what Yonea just mentioned raises a very interesting question in my mind, and perhaps Asmus or Mark or others. In the root zone LGR, are we, and in relation to LAGA, are we expecting multiple LAGA kind of things, I don't even know what you call it anymore, LGRs, or is it going to become one full thing? That appears to be a very interesting question, which leads to, I was late jumping in. I wanted to ask this question earlier to Kim on the issue of the language element in the meta tag. And this kind of relates to my what Yonea just mentioned is, do we need some sort of use of this for integration or multiple in the case of Han, multiple quote unquote languages using Han and creating one single instance of the LGR, is that useful? And which makes me question, what the root, how would this be implemented for the root LGR? Is there going to be multiple instances of this that combines together, or one big, XML?
We have Asmus on the line. I could also answer. I think there is to me, there's two parts of the answer. First is, unless there is an impact on the actual specification, your question is kind of out of scope of IETF in terms of, the actual LGR, unless there's an impact on the file format. The real answer is there will be multiple XML files. Please go ahead, Asmus.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just put the text in the chat just as a backup to what I'm saying, what I'm going to say. I agree with you, Mark. The question can only be understood as a investigative question as to will there be a situation that has a potential impact on the file format. And given the file format as it is, and the integration panel for the root zone does not see a need to ask for any changes, the root zone LGR, while it is logically a unified concept, will physically consist of a integrated collection of XML files. So they're all separate XML files. And in processing a label, you would automatically select the appropriate XML file based on the language and script tag that you give with the label application. And then you process things according to that file. And the integration task consists out of making sure that these files are mutually compatible. So there is no need in adding any complications to the syntax to somehow create integrated things in a single XML file. That is not the correct approach. And so I think we can conclude that we will not have impact on the specification.
Yoshiro again. So multiple XML files will occur in second level or GTLDs also, because many GTLDs accept many languages, not only one language, but many languages. So such kind of integration work will happen in the GTLDs. So that is why I asked kind of integration mechanism is required, or it is depends on each registry's policy. So it's no matter of this working group consideration.
Okay, Kim made a comment in Java. He says that for him, WebRTC doesn't work very well. So he says, not sure it usually answers the questions, but I envisage at the minimum, LGRs will supersede IDN tables in a similar way they are used today, i.e., one or more per zone, depending on zone administrators' policies.
So this is Paul Hoffman. Maybe, so Yunea-san asked two questions that I think are quite separable. And I think the working group, maybe when we're done with the current document, needs to think about this whole second level thing. Because there are, just because there isn't an intention to have a single integrated one in the root, doesn't mean that there's not a logical extension that we would need, such as a country with multiple languages, multiple scripts, multiple languages for which there's script overlap and such like that.
It's Andrew Sullivan. I thought that the script, language, country combinations were all possible given the label format that had been settled a long time ago, unless I overlooked that change there. So that doesn't seem to me to be actually an extension that is needed. It seemed to me actually that one of the strengths of this whole format was it was possible just to reuse it at another level, and that worked just fine. I mean, I don't know if I've missed something, but.
Edmund, actually, Edmund here. In response to that, that's one of the things that I was just looking through the document again. We call that the language. We currently call that the language in the meta tag thing. We might want to change that language. Sorry for that. We might want to change that word. We might not want to call that language because that's kind of the name of the LGR. It's often expressed as either language or script or language script, some form. Right now, it's a little bit interesting. It's kind of, you kind of think that it will always be there, but right now the specification says it's optional. I can understand the motivation for making it optional, but if we change that word or that that field name to, I don't know, IDN LGR tag or something like that, then we can make it a required thing and then maybe recommend that it contain elements of language script or that kind of descriptor, which that plus the scope part would form a kind of a would form what we want to achieve, which is this is the scope and this is the domain under which it's this LGR pertains to.
So it's Andrew again. I think that there is such an identifier in there, and it's not right at the top of my head right now because it's Thursday. But I believe that there is one. I don't think it's the one that you were looking at, but so I think that this is there. But I also think that I suspect that this is the level of detail that we're not going to work at the microphone, and that probably we need to do this on the list.
Thank you, Andrew. And second, section 3.3.3 discussed that, which is essentially from RFC 5646. And at the end, I mean, the actual tag name, we don't really care, I don't know, I'm not sure, but my own personal view.
Okay, that's the end of our agenda. There's no one at the mic. In the less than, let's do the Apple Watch, yeah, in the less than 1 minute that we have left, is there any other business that we need to attend to?
During last meeting in August, I presented some mapping to JSON format. I haven't heard anything except from Paul. I would like to know what should I do with it? Should I let it die? Should I just update it again? Propose it to a working group?
I'm not seeing anyone standing up to respond to that, so my suggestion would be take the question to the mailing list.
Okay, will do.
Yeah.
There's also somebody in the queue now.
Asmus?
No, that's, that was supposed to be Asmus.
Yes.
Asmus.
Yeah, people like to give me different names. I just had a thing. I think I see no need to fiddle with the language element, the section 3.3.3 in the specification. I think there's I don't see any use case that we cannot cover, and I'm not really in favor for renaming's sake. That would be my parting shot on this one. And I'm looking forward to Audrey's question on the mailing list, because I could absolutely not understand what he was saying.
Okay, well, that's why we have the mailing list. Okay, I believe we're finished, folks. Thank you very much. Yeah, no thrown fruit or vegetables, right?